Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Geezerology Roundtable. I'm Scott here today with my old friends Bob and Dan and my new friend Bill. And we're gathered together today to revisit a landmark album from 1970 titled Chicago. This was the self-titled second LP from this renamed band. It came 9 months after their self-titled debut, which was the Chicago Transit Authority. Now, Chicago is the title of this album that we're going to talk about today. Most folks do now refer to it as Chicago 2, but it's still officially just titled Chicago. So the debut, CTA, was a hit among the album-oriented FM crowd in 1969. And then Chicago 2 came along in January 1970. And this is the band that put them in, I'm sorry, this is the album that put this band in the mainstream. They had a couple of hit singles off of this album, Make Me Smile and 25 or 624. And this is pretty much the album that sent this band sort of soaring into the commercial stratosphere over the next several years. Now, Bob, Dan, and I covered the Chicago Transit Authority in a Geezerology video a little while back. And as you recall, we all raved about that one. But our new guy, Bill, he's new to Chicago, and I believe he told me that he had never listened to this album before. So we'll let him kick us off today and give us a fresh perspective of this record. So Bill, let me start by asking. I remember a couple weeks ago, this one stood out to me. We were talking about the Guess Who and the song Undone, and you mentioned the flute, and you said something about how the flute is your is number 51 on your list of 50 favorite musical instruments, right? And I remembered that as I was revisiting this album this week, that there's a whole lot of flute going on Chicago 2. So my question to you to get you started is, was there enough flute here for you? But more seriously, did this were you able to survive that torture?
Well, I have to say, as Bob Dylan says in Quinn the Eskimo, this was not my cup of meat, to tell you the truth. It was a little tricky, but I have to say that I'll give you a little bit of my background. As you're correct in mentioning, I had never listened to this record, and I had actually never really listened to any Chicago at all, except for their singles, which many of which I'm familiar with over the years. Some I like an awful lot, and some I don't particularly care for. But I never really thought about Chicago much at all. I mean, it was not something that I considered essential listening. And if I thought of it at all, again, judgmentally based on the singles and my take on it, which is, this is a band with a lot of brass and stuff like that. If I need something like that in the era that I started to buy records, which would have been the 72 on, I probably was going to lean toward Earth, Wind, and Fire or something like that. And then I kind of skipped the whole Chicago period at all, to be frank, because I was a pretentious little kid who, when I started to explore music that I had no familiarity with, some older kids who probably they thought they had my best interest at heart, but really didn't. They got me, listening to jazz fusion stuff. So I was listening to Herbie Hancock and Bitches Brew, Miles Davis, and all of this kind of very esoteric jazz fusion rock, some of which I liked right away and some I didn't. And when I had revisited it years later, I found much of it was pretty good. A lot of it was pretentious. So anyway, that's my background with how I think of jazz rock. So going into Chicago 2, this is when my first research with the band actually started. I figured, what I know about them is they're a jazz rock band that is kind of in the adult contemporary sphere. And, I'm a contemporary adult, so I should probably line up with this pretty well. I found out that it was not really suited for my both my attention span, which I think has gotten shorter over the years, and my ability to withstand what I perceive to be a little bit of unnecessary pretentiousness. I found a couple of songs immediately catchy, and I'm a big guy who likes melody. If the melody is there, I can withstand anything. But I found that once I got past the first song, which I think is Moving In, which I like quite a bit, that there was a lot of drag, and I mean, it was pleasant enough, but not really anything that I could figure out why I would put this record on. It wasn't really easy listening. It wasn't dance music. It wasn't contemplative music. It wasn't turn up it loud and go for a drive music. So it didn't really lend itself to anything that I could think of would be suitable for me. And then the second side, which has got the very well-known, I think it's a 13-minute suite of songs, has a couple of very nice songs that I had not realized were part of this suite that I'd heard previously. I think Make Me Smile is one, and there's that Color My World, which is kind of makes cold shivers run down my spine because it reminds me of close dancing in teenage like 12 to 13-year-old dancing, and I wasn't very good at it, and made me very nervous. It gave me bad flashbacks, and I couldn't really get into that. I appreciated a couple of the songs. I liked the melodies were adequate, and then the second record. So this is a double record. The second one was another suite of stuff that I found actually not really my cup of tea either, because it was kind of pseudo classical with some jazz touches, and I think it was to the detriment of both styles of music. And then it finished off with a whole spectrum of what was, I guess, one of their main points of view. I think, and that this kind of started, I guess, when they were back in the CTA days, of kind of a political perspective, which is natural given where they were from and the elements of youth culture in the late 60s, early 70s. So I found it a little more interesting, but not terribly moving. And I was very happy when the thing ended. So that's kind of my take on the album. But here's the good part was it also made me do some research, since I only had to listen to one more record. Was to listen to the Chicago Transit Authority, which, like I guess you guys, I loved that record. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It felt really immediate, and Terry Kath is all over that record, and I think that's what Chicago 2 misses from my perspective. There's not enough of that kind of blazing guitar to offset the predominance of the brass, and they're sneaking that flute in there at that high pitch that only I can hear, and it's driving me around the bend. So I had some problems. I had really some problems with the record. I think if, like a lot of the double LPs, if they made it a single record, it would have been more palatable to me. I think what is surprising, and what I think is a great example of how eclectic the music environment was in that era, is that here's a band that they debut with the double album. They convinced the record company to do that. Their second record is a double album that sells even more. I mean, and this is not easy stuff that would be necessarily highly popular on the radio. I mean, you wouldn't get played today, and certainly not selling the volumes that they did. And then subsequently, I mean, they had a whole, I think were the first 4 or 5 records were all double records. So I mean, they had a
Chicago 3 was a double, and then their fourth one was a double live album. So the fourth live album was a double album for Chicago, which means there was 4 records in it.
I mean, I think it's amazing. And I mean, they all sold. This is a really popular group. So probably not the thing that I would listen to myself. I kind of respect certainly their craft. The musicianship is interesting. I could have used more guitar because I think that's the secret weapon that really kind of kicks it up a notch for me, and would which is what made the debut really something I will definitely go back to listen to that again. I don't think I would do that with the Chicago 2 all that often.
Okay, so had you been with us when we did Chicago Transit Authority a couple of 3-4 months back, then you would have been with us and basically with our tendency to rave on that one, right? Am I hearing that you really like that?
Absolutely, I loved it.
And then okay, and now you're kicking us off with our look at Chicago 2, and you're not a fan of it.
No.
Well, Bob, let me bounce you off of that. After our rave of Chicago Transit Authority, was the second one it's obviously different. It's a different record. There's no question about that, and the sound of it, and the tone, and their musical approach, and everything like that. Was this a good move for them, in your opinion?
I don't know. I fell asleep listening to it. Seriously, I was a big fan of Chicago Transit Authority, as you know, and I bought this album way back in the day when it came out. So it's been in my vinyl collection now for decades and decades. Have not listened to it for decades and decades. So when this got on our schedule, I had to go to my Apple Music and listen to, its streaming. And I found it. I rediscovered why I haven't listened to this album in decades. I found it incredibly boring, quite a departure from what they did in Chicago Transit Authority. Gone are some of those free-form horn jams, the guitar solos. This is a much more controlled album. Terry Kath, other than a few places, is almost non-existent with his guitar work. I think it would have been a much better single album. It's got too much filler for a double album. It almost sounds like a movie soundtrack rather than a rock album. And there are a few standout cuts here and there, 25 or 624. They kind of start to break out and let things go. Then Now More Than Ever. And Make Me Smile, so but there are the hits on here, I remember and like, and they went a little bit more toward that jazz rock fusion stuff, and that kind of left me cold. Color My World, I hated that song back when it was new. I'm like Bill, it reminds me of all of those horrible slow dances that you would get roped into. It became the go-to song for every high school prom out there in the 70s. And then it became, the wedding song for every wedding in the 70s. I hated that song then. I hate it now. I'm like Bill, I get cold shivers up and down my spine every time I hear it. So yeah, this was a radical departure in my mind for the Chicago Transit Authority that I loved. And I was just kind of bored by it, left me really unmoved. And their political suite toward the end of the album, listening to it now, I found it, late 60s, early 70s political naivete, and the hippie, let's all get together and love one another type stuff. So that part of it to me didn't stand up well over the course of time. And I really miss Terry Kath letting loose with those incredible guitar solos of his. So yeah, to me, it was boring and much too a controlled thing, and too much filler. So thumbs down.
D.
Yeah, Chicago 2. For me, I think this would have been fantastic as a single album. You could maybe make a case for 3 sides, but not 4 sides. And this is something Bill mentioned that early on in their career, with these double albums, and it makes you wonder, boy, they really had the producer who was James William Gershio, and the label, they were all in on this. And of course, keeping context in mind, there was a lot, the atmosphere was a lot more open to extended solos, kind of more fusion experimental type music. So they were doing, that's exactly what they were doing. Yeah, this album was definitely lighter. It didn't have that urban grit that CTA did. In CTA, I think the rhythm section was really just a prominent part of that. With Peter Cetera, and I think Daniel Serafin was one of the better drummers of the era, and just another, all these guys in this band. You have almost an overflow of musical talent, between the horns, the guitar, organ player, vocally, they come together. But I think it may have just been maybe their vision, or they just said, no, we're going to pursue this. And maybe every idea that they brought to the producer and the label, they said, sure, let's do this. And well, they did it. And I think the extended, the flute solo, if they could have shortened that in half, that would have made a lot more sense. And sides 3 and 4, I can take it or leave it. Now, myself, I do like horns. I do like, Chicago was probably the first band of its era that could fuse trombone into a rock feeling. I think the album started off pretty good. I like Terry Kath's The Road, because it's got kind of a nice little intricate pattern with that. And one other thing to be said with this album, the success of this LP, which I believe reached number 5 in the UK and US in terms of sales, was 25 or 6 to 4, and yes, Color My World. Those songs just took off, and I think 25 or 6 to 4, that was just one of the kick songs that people identified with. And the success of the sales and popularity of Chicago 2 had people go back, and then I believe the record label, they went ahead and did they reissue? They reissued, not reissued, but they started releasing singles from CTA, and every one of those songs I just love everything, and the experiment, I would say experiments, but Fancy Colors and Memories of Love. I think this album again showcases what a good, not only was he an excellent guitarist, but a darn good vocalist was Terry Kath. Normally, you don't get both gifts like that, but he did. Side 4, and I think that part of it definitely dates it when you put in the political, realm. But yeah, for me, this did not detract from their success and what their next ideas were, but it was just, let's just say if you were baking a cake, I think they put too much baking soda in the recipe here, a little too much. So I enjoyed the singles, and I still think 25 or 6 to 4 is one of their best songs they've ever recorded. And so that's where I'm at with Chicago 2. And people forget too, I think at the time that they were considered progressive rock, and for what they were doing, there wasn't too many other bands out there that have horns always been part of rock and roll? Yeah, you could go all the way back to Bill Haley, but to perform it on stage live, that was still fairly new. So, and I also, one little detail, most of these guys met in college, and I think they were all mostly music majors, especially the guys in the brass section. So it shows, and I think they were influenced by the avant-garde jazz people they were listening to, Miles Davis and maybe Cannonball Adderley, stuff like that.
I'm going to agree with you guys. I think Chicago Transit Authority was definitely a better album than this, but I'm going to disagree with you guys. I think this is a much better album than you guys are giving it credit for. And I think where this goes is, yeah, D, you were right. I mean, these guys were all music students. You know, they just weren't kids who picked up and learned instruments. They all studied music, and that really shows on this album. I mean, this is all about the musical theory that these guys learned when they were in school, right? Which you didn't hear a whole lot of during the early 70s in the world of rock, you know. Yeah, this album, I mean, when you get right down to it, this album is all about not the songwriting, but the composition. You know, these guys all learned in school how to compose music, how to you know, how to use you know, academic musical theory, and that's what this album is all about. Yeah, I mean, everybody thinks of this as and talks about it as jazz fusion. I don't hear jazz. There's a little bit of jazz fusion here, but I think this is one of the early albums, one of the early rock albums, not the first one, but one of the early ones that really used classical motifs and classical theory in it, especially on that suite on side 3, The Memories of Love. That's a whole lot of classical composition going in there, and I like it. You know, and there's a lot of flute going on there. There's a lot of there's a little bit of string plucking going on there. There's nobody here credited for playing any string instruments, so I don't know who's doing that. Whether it's somebody in the band or whether they hired a outside musician, I have no idea. But I think that's what the bottom line. The first side is 4 fairly straight CTA type of rock songs. You know, 3, 4, 6-minute rock songs. Not so much heavy on the guitar like CTA was, but these are pretty much straight ahead pop rock songs. And I'm not a big fan of the music on side 1. I don't think it kicks into gear until In the Country. I think In the Country is a pretty good song, the Kath composition that Kath and Satira sang together. And from there, I got to tell you, I think this is a hell of a ride. Sides 2, sides 3, and sides 4. I love these things. I don't listen to this album very much, but every time I do, and I've listened to it 4, 5, 6 times over the past week or so, and you know, every time I listen to it, I love this stuff. I just feel in tune with it. The big difference, just like the first album, where Terry Kath was a star, the first album was with his guitar playing. I still think Terry Kath is the star of this album, but I don't think it's as far as guitar playing. You guys are right. I mean, his out there, you know, nasty rock guitar isn't on this album very much, except in the middle section of 25 or 6-4, which, you know, people who know the song 25 or 6-4 by hearing the AM radio single version of this, they don't hear what makes the song good, because all that middle Terry Kath guitar section is all sliced out, you know, to make it a 3-minute single or whatever. But I listen to this album pretty much just kind of going, okay, let's get through this. Let's get to the songs that Terry Kath sings. I think Kath is the star of this album with his vocalist, with his vocalizing. I think he just shows himself here as just this incredibly soulful singer. It kind of started. He and Satira share lead vocals on In the Country on side 1, and I think it's pretty good. Through the years, whenever we have one of those songs where Kath and Satira are both share lead vocal duties, I think those two voices work together so well. They did that several times over the course of their career. Then we flip it over to side two, and it opens up with a Robert Lamb "Wake Up Sunshine," which is fine, I think. But I think it's a nice, if this would have been a three-sided album, "Wake Up Sunshine" would have been a nice first track of this album to get you into it. But now, then we get into "Ballet for a Girl in Buchanan," which I've always thought this was a great piece of music, the whole thing, and mostly because Terry Kath just sings his ass off on "Make Me Smile." I know what you guys are saying about "Color My World." I remember that, going to all the weddings of our friends and our relatives when we were, in high school and just out of high school, and every damn one of them, "Color My World" was the song that they played for the bride and groom's first dance. It's like, okay, I'm over this. But hearing in this context, and if you just kind of get past that and you listen to Terry Kath sing this song, this guy is fantastic. He's just got this great voice. And then he closes out with "Now More Than Ever," which is basically the end of what the single was on "Make Me Smile." I think Kath's voice is beautiful on that last movement of "Memories of Love," where it's just him and the flute playing in the background. I can't think of any of too many more songs that I've heard in my life that are more beautiful than that song. And I think he also knocks it out of the park in the third movement of "It Better End Soon." Yeah, it's the old political. It's one of Robert Lamb's political. Lamb was the political guy here. He's the guy who wrote all that stuff. And so just get past that. But here, listen to Terry Kath doing a just good balls of the wall rock vocal, and that's what that third movement is all about to me. Yeah, I don't know. I like this album a lot. There's a lot of what you might call filler, but I kind of appreciate that. There's a lot of instrumental passages on there, which that might come off as filler to you. But I enjoy it. Would you agree with me that this is really? This is on the cusp. This is before progressive rock became a thing. When we think of prog rock, we think of King Crimson, Yes, Genesis, and bands like that, where they're all about the instrumental passages and the time changes and the suites of songs and things like this. This was really, when you think about it, this was right on the cusp of when all that stuff started happening. And if you listen to that, to the stuff with that in mind, I can see where that really fits into that culture. It's stuff like the "Memories of Love" suite, the "It Better End Soon" suite, even the "Ballet for a Girl in Buchanan to a lesser extent. This stuff isn't remembered so much when people talk about when prog rock started and the beginnings of prog rock, but now, as we're having this discussion, and after having listened to this a few times this past week, it strikes me that all this is on the very cusp of that movement, and it makes me wonder why this stuff isn't mentioned by all the prog history buffs.
I think because they're narrow-minded and they don't have a sense of musical history, probably. There was a lot to say, prog rock has a heavy English UK side. Well, that's true, but where did they get their stuff from? American jazz, and then they just took that. But
and classical music.
Yeah, and like I said, for the time, all these guys were accomplished soloists, I believe. Some stand out more than others. And when they released this, yeah, they said, let's do something very outside the lines. And that included the topics of the songs, love songs. Of course, they added in the social comment. So I think they wanted to push or expand those boundaries. And their producer, record label said, yeah. And if you go back, when they released this album, was it January 1970? And I believe they were able to record this album less than a month. And this is not just, a bunch of 3 or 4 chord songs and, you say you want to, burn down the house or, something like that. This is, pretty well thought out stuff. And the memories of love and other things like that, they really wanted to, step outside, I think, the 3-minute AM radio format and showcase that, which they they ended up, doing. And I think they don't get enough credit for being at the forefront of progressive rock sound because, number one, I think their career is extended so much and they've went through different musical changes. This was trend-setting. This was outside the lines at the time. I mean, there were very few other groups doing this.
I think part of the problem is anytime you get into kind of genres and what fits into what genre, it gets kind of muddy pretty quickly. So, I mean, I guess you could conceivably say that George Gershwin was a prog rocker because he combined American jazz with classical music and Rhapsody in Blue. The issue, I think, with Chicago, probably part of it is a degree, like Dan said, the Americanization approach. I mean, that's part of it, because if you look at, kind of the typical initial catalog of, who comes to mind when you think prog, and, is Pink Floyd in, certain eras, a prog band, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and, I don't know, Rush. I mean, these are all bands I don't particularly follow or pay much attention to, but given the types of things that are happening in this record, I think you could make a very strong case that they're on the leading edge of what it is to be progressive, to take all kinds of components that are usually either very much segmented or at least very delicately mixed, and they're kind of putting them all in the blender. And because they're skilled, they're able to do it in a way that doesn't really diminish the different components, which sometimes is the case, where you put stuff in and you end up with something worse than what you would get if you just kept them separate or somewhat limited. So I think their talent gives them a certain pedigree and allows them to get away with things that other bands couldn't do or wouldn't even think of doing. So yeah, I would say they're a prog band. Now, for me personally, that doesn't help the case, because that I'm a little leery of prog only because of its tendency to go off the rails. So you have to be really careful to make sure that you don't go overboard, and sometimes you end up being overblown and underbaked. And
I mean, the good typical prog was always just right there on the cusp of just about falling over the edge. the classic prog song "Close to the Edge" by Yes. That was in a different way. That title was pretty much described the entirety of that genre. They were always close, and sometimes they went over. I mean, that was one of the distinguishing characteristics, is that it could get pretty pretentious and pretty over the top very easily.
Well, if your label gives you 4 sides, they're daring you to go over the edge. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, it's like, do it.
Bob, after listening, well, I want to throw a question at you. And after listening to this album front to back 5 or 6 times over the last couple of weeks, I'm left with one burning question on
Okay.
this. And maybe you can have an answer for this. My burning question after listening to this album through a few times is, where do we go? Where do we go? Where do we go from here? That's a rhetorical question.
Well, if we're talking specifically about where do we go,
That's a question that Peter Cetera leaves us all with at the end of this record.
well, I bought a lot of Chicago albums after Chicago Transit Authority, and then never really listened to any of them real seriously other than Chicago Transit Authority. So in my mind, they jumped the shark pretty quickly after that first album. So I've really been kind of indifferent to them after that debut album.
Thanks for listening. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. So long.